Before the best chapter of your life, there is often a season that feels nothing like progress. It feels like confusion. It feels like emptiness. It feels like losing your taste for the life you worked so hard to build. You stop feeling moved by what used to motivate you. You stop fitting inside roles that once made sense. You look at your routines, your relationships, your ambitions, and something in you goes quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet in the way a house goes quiet after someone has left. This is the part most people misunderstand. They think the new life begins when clarity arrives. It usually begins earlier than that. It begins when your old self starts becoming unbearable to live as. That is why before a real transformation, many people do not feel inspired. They feel disoriented. You may still be functioning. You answer messages. You go to work. You say the right things. You keep moving. But underneath all of that, there is a strange and growing absence. Something no longer fits. And because nothing dramatic may have happened on the outside, you start blaming yourself. You call yourself ungrateful, lost, too sensitive, emotionally unstable, lazy, confused. But often, what you are calling confusion is actually the collapse of a false alignment. The life you are living may have been working on the surface while betraying you underneath. That is why it feels so unsettling. You are not simply losing direction, you are losing tolerance for what no longer reflects who you really are. This tends to happen quietly at first. You feel tired in places that used to excite you. Certain conversations start to feel unbearable. You notice how often you perform instead of speak, how often you smile while feeling nothing, how often you say yes because it is easier than telling the truth. And the worst part is that you cannot always explain why it feels so wrong. You just know that what once passed as normal now feels strangely dead. For many people, this is the moment they panic. They assume something is broken because the old identity is no longer holding. But this is often what happens before the deeper chapter begins. The self you created for survival starts to crack. The role that kept you loved begins to suffocate you. The version of you built around adaptation starts losing its power. That does not feel exciting. It feels like grief. Because the false self is still a self. It may not be the truest part of you, but it carried you. It protected you. It got you through rooms where authenticity felt dangerous. It helped you stay connected when being fully yourself came with a cost. Maybe you became agreeable because conflict felt unsafe. Maybe you became impressive because being ordinary did not feel lovable. Maybe you became selfless because having needs felt shameful. Maybe you became emotionally calm because your anger once threatened attachment. Whatever the strategy was, it worked for a while. That is why it is so painful when it stops working. You are not just changing habits, you are outgrowing a survival identity. And survival identities do not leave quietly. They fight to remain in charge. They tell you to stay where you are known, to keep pleasing, to keep performing, to keep being useful, to keep choosing what is familiar over what is true. So the period before a better life often feels like inner conflict. Part of you wants to stay the same, because the old self still knows how to survive. Another part of you is exhausted from living that way. This is where the emptiness deepens, because you can no longer fully return to who you were, but you are not yet living as who you are becoming. You are in between, and being in between is deeply uncomfortable. The old life starts losing color, but the new one has not yet taken shape. People may notice you changing before you have words for it. You become less available, less eager to explain yourself,
Less willing to laugh off what hurts. Less tolerant of shallow connections. Less impressed by things that once gave you a sense of worth. This can make you feel guilty. It can make other people uncomfortable too, because whenever you stop abandoning yourself, something changes in your relationships. Not everyone was attached to your essence. Some were attached to your accessibility, to the version of you that absorbed everything, that never disrupted the emotional temperature of the room, that made life easier for others by staying disconnected from your own truth. So before the best chapter begins, there is often loss. Loss of old certainty, loss of false belonging, loss of identities that once made you legible to other people. Sometimes you lose relationships. Sometimes you lose ambition for paths that were never really yours. Sometimes you lose your old image of yourself as the strong one, the easy one, the endlessly understanding one. This is why transformation can feel humiliating before it feels liberating. You do not feel elevated, you feel stripped. And this is where a deeper psychological truth enters. What feels like your life falling apart may actually be your psyche refusing to keep organizing itself around what is false. Carl Jung understood this with unusual clarity. He knew that growth does not begin with becoming more acceptable. It begins when the buried parts of you start demanding a place in consciousness. The anger you suppressed, the grief you postponed, the desire you minimized, the directness you softened, the truth you edited, the self you left behind in order to stay loved. When these parts begin returning, life can feel unstable. Not because you are regressing, because the shadow is no longer willing to stay underground. And when the shadow rises, it does not arrive as a neat insight. It often arrives as restlessness, sadness, irritability, numbness, a sudden inability to keep pretending. It arrives as the body saying no where the mouth used to say yes. It arrives as loneliness inside relationships that used to distract you from yourself. It arrives as a sharp awareness of how much of your life has been built around keeping the peace instead of telling the truth. This is why the period before a better chapter can feel like a collapse. Because in one sense, it is. But it is not the collapse of your future. It is the collapse of your old arrangement with yourself. The old deal no longer works. The deal that said, I will stay safe by staying small. I will stay loved by staying useful. I will stay connected by betraying what I feel. At some point, the psyche refuses that deal. That refusal is painful, but it is sacred, because the discomfort is not random. It is a sign that something real in you is waking up. And waking up rarely feels graceful at first. It feels like seeing too much. You start noticing where you abandon yourself in real time, where you over-explain, where you betray your body's signals, where you shape-shift to remain liked,
where you accept crumbs and call it maturity, where you silence your own hurt and then wonder why life feels unreal. This is the beginning of the return. Not when you become confident, when you become honest. That honesty is quiet at first. You admit that something is no longer working. You admit that some connections only survived because you kept leaving yourself inside them. You admit that some goals belonged more to your conditioning than to your soul. You admit that your exhaustion is not just physical. It is the fatigue of carrying identities that no longer belong to you. That recognition changes the direction of your life, because once you see it clearly, you cannot fully go back. You may try, most people do. They try to re-enter the old roles, to revive the old motivation, to want what they used to want, to return to who they were before everything began to feel thin and false. But when the deeper self has started to wake up, going back feels like suffocation. That is why the next chapter often announces itself through discomfort. You become too conscious to keep living unconsciously, too honest to keep performing without cost, too awake to keep calling self-abandonment love. And still, this does not mean the new chapter begins dramatically. Usually, it begins in smaller ways. A boundary you finally honor, a truth you stop editing, a relationship you see clearly, a silence you no longer rush to fill, a decision that disappoints others but feels clean inside you. This is how a real life begins, not with noise, with alignment, not with becoming someone new, with ceasing to be someone you had to be in order to survive. That is why before the best chapter of your life, you may feel lost, because the map you were using belonged to a self that is no longer leading. You may feel empty, because what once filled you was never truly yours. You may feel alone, because not everyone can follow when you stop performing familiarity. You may feel broken, because the mask is cracking and the face underneath has not fully remembered itself yet. But that does not mean you are failing. It may mean the deeper life has finally begun. So if everything feels strangely unfinished, if your old identity is no longer convincing, if the life around you still works on paper but no longer feels alive inside your body, do not rush to label it as ruin. Some chapters do not begin with certainty. They begin with the unbearable weight of living falsely one day longer. And maybe that is the real threshold. Not the moment your life becomes easier, the moment your soul becomes unwilling to keep disappearing in order to maintain it. From there, the path may still be unclear, but it will be yours. And after years of being what was needed, what was pleasing, what was useful, and what was safe, that may be the first true sign that the best chapter is finally close. Not because everything around you has changed, because you are no longer willing to keep leaving yourself behind.